Hey youngins, Silver Mongoose here, back with another buyer's guide / review for you guys. Now, in 1989, Sega, or Service Games, came out with its fourth console, the Sega Genesis Model 1. Now this thing here boasted, as you can see, 16-bit high-definition graphics right on the console. Now, just like Nintendo did with its NES, Sega actually tried to partner up with Atari, but that didn't really work out because of, Atari's pretty bad with business. And so Sega just launched it by itself, and it's a good thing too, because this was really its first very successful console. The Sega Master System was fairly popular in some regions of the world, but not so much in North America. And this thing here offered more arcade titles, more quote-unquote mature titles, which is what they thought of mature back then. Was basically they had blood and a couple games with gore. It also boasted that it had blast processing. You can see tons of ridiculous commercials on YouTube. It doesn't actually exist. It's just something they made up to make their system seem more powerful. It's like if the Super Nintendo came out with, oh, we have Super Turbo Sound Chip. It's complete BS. But still, it got this thing off the ground, and with slogans like Genesis does what Nintendo don't, things like that. The Sega Genesis actually did extremely well and ended up having almost 70% of the market over the NES and Super NES, and basically they were doing really well, and they kind of screwed it up by putting all these attachments on there. Sega CD, Sega 32X. The only attachment on here which was really, I guess, worthwhile was the power base adapter, which stuck on top right there, and it allowed you to play your Sega Master System games. So it would basically create a lot more games that you could play on this thing. It made it backwards compatible. But this wasn't the first model. This was the first model, sorry. It's not the only model. This is the Model 1. I'll go over this really quickly. This is where the games go in, obviously. You also have here your reset, your on and off, and volume control for a headphone jack. And if you actually want, you can get stereo sound out of this thing by getting a jack in here. It can actually go out and go into your red and white, or your left and right sound, and plug that in your TV to get stereo sound out of this thing. Because out of the back, which I'll show you, you can't do that. You also have your two controller ports, which are a bit off center, but that's no big deal. In the back you have tons of stuff. You have, first off, your AC adapter, and then an AV out, RF out, channel 3, channel 4, and EXT, which is, I don't know, external extension. I don't actually know what that's for. But these two here, this one's just for your standard RF, and this one is if you want to get composite cables. And though you can get composite cables for this thing, it will still just have mono sound. And there's nothing much else except on the bottom here. All the Sega Genesis have this. You can take that off, and it's got this little red thing that says do not remove. You remove it anyways, and then you have all that bare circuitry there, and that will plug into your Sega CD, which we will get to in another review. So that's pretty much the basics of that. The power adapter is a model 1602, and that'll be pretty important later on. We'll get to that. And your RF, and it's just your standard RF here, plugs into the back, goes in the back of your TV. Now, mine broke one day, and I went on a search to get something to fit, something else to work for it, and so I grabbed here my TurboGrafx 16 RF adapter, because it does fit in the back, but that doesn't work. But if you're like me, or really stuck, what you can do, surprisingly, is use this right here. A Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, RF switch, which will screw into the back of your TV, and will actually fit in the back of your Sega Genesis and work fairly well. The only downside to this that I found is if you are using this with your Sega CD, it makes the sound absolutely awful. But with just your Sega Genesis, it seems to work perfectly fine. Now this model here is actually, I read that it's the easiest to mod, if that's what you guys are looking for. In 1994, they came out with a smaller model, which in my opinion looks a little less cool, but some people like it a lot more. It's got a lot less on it there. It's got your power and your reset, which are a bit flimsy. They get stuck sometimes, but still. Again, you have your Sega CD thing there. And your controller ports are a bit more in the center. In the back, you only really have your AV out and your AC adapter. Now, the AC adapter for this system is a model 2103, which you guys can see. And it's important because this thing has 10 volts and 0.85 amps, whereas your Model 1 has 9 volts and 1.2 amps. As you can see, they're different size. Do not mix these two up because it will eventually ruin your system. So this is your standard RF, which you would, this would go in your TV, this is plugged into the back. But if you really want to, as you can see in your Sega Genesis manual, it says right there, TV with video and stereo auto. So all you have to do is get a special cable there. You can see, get composite cables for the back, and then you can have stereo sound with your Sega Genesis Model 2. There's another model after this, Sega Genesis Model 3, which will not work with your Sega CD or your Sega 32X. And then there was another model, kind of, the Sega Nomad, which does play Genesis games. We'll get to that in another review. So there's technically 4 models. And yeah, that's pretty much all there is to that. Another important thing, the Sega Genesis manual warns you, only use this indoors, which is really good because I know a lot of you guys probably love playing this out in the pouring rain. Great idea. So now we're going to get to the controller and do that real quick. This is your standard Genesis controller, A, B, and C there, D-pad and your start. And this controller, usually they're fairly solid and they fit very well in your hand because they were marketed for an older audience. There's 2 lengths of cords. Some of them you can get that actually have like almost 3 or 4 feet more length than the other controller. So if you can, try to get one of those. You can also get a controller like this that is absolutely no different except it has red on it, which makes it look a lot cooler with your Sega Genesis Model 1. Now, a big problem actually with controllers like this, if you're playing something like Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter, you only have 3 buttons. In Mortal Kombat, you actually have to press start to block. It's absolutely ridiculous. So you can always pick up something like this, which is your Sega Genesis arcade pad. It has a digital D-pad there, and you see X, Y, Z, and your start, and also has a mode button here, which is supposed to turn it from the 3-button mode to the 6-button mode, but on all the games I've tried, it's always just the 1 mode. It is a bit smaller, but it still fits pretty good in your hand. Those are a bit harder to find. And then of course you can also get air replacement pads, you know, with your turbo and your slow and all that kind of stuff. And if you really want even more length, if you get one of the shorter cords, you can just grab something like this, which is, this plugs in your Genesis, this plugs in your controller, and instantly, voila, you have a bunch of more length for your cord. You can also get something called the power plug, which comes with, you know, turbo, auto. It's basically kind of like a really watered down Game Genie, but the good thing about it is they're easy to find, they're really cheap, and you can just use it as an extender. You don't even have to actually use that for that. There's also a mouse, arcade stick, a gun, all that stuff, but it's not very popular. One quick thing before I run out of time here is all these controllers will work with your Sega Genesis, all your models, even your Sega Nomad. It'll work with your 32X, your Sega CD, it'll work with Atari 2600 and Atari 7200, your JVC XI, all that stuff. Alright, so I'll be back in part 2. I gotta go.